Thanks for being here this morning. We're glad to see you. We're starting a new study. Well, actually, we sort of introduced our study last Sunday, talking about the life of Solomon, who is, of course, the author of the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But we're going to get a little more in-depth look at the book of Ecclesiastes. We had studied the wisdom literature, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, and so we need to look at Ecclesiastes, but we decided to look at it more in depth. And so that's what we plan to do here today. In your study guide, there's this chart. We're going to have this up here each week as we study, because I think it's really important for us to understand that in the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon flip-flops. He does it. Actually, most commentators divide the book up into 4 sermons. And in each of those sections that they identify, he doesn't identify as such, but in each of those sections that's identified as a sermon, Solomon's going to do 2 things. One, in one part of it, he's going to talk about a view of life that does not include any notion of God. And he concludes, in each instance, he's going to conclude that's just utter vanity. I mean, it's useless. There's no value to life if there is no God. And then he'll flip-flop, and in the second part of those sermons, he will talk about God, that there is a God, and that it helps make sense of everything. Now, what you got to be real careful about, and we're going to be repeating this over and over again, is if you go to those parts of the sermon wherein he's talking about life with no God in the picture, and if you take some of those statements that he makes, it's contradictory. It contradicts other things that the Bible teaches. And so if you don't have this view of Solomon's continual flip-flopping between these 2 positions, and you go to one of those sections where he's talking about life without God, man, it can be really confusing. And so I really think that this chart is important for us to reference so that we know where we are in regards to the perspective from which Solomon is writing at that particular instance, okay? So you've got that chart in your study guide. And that chart, I made that chart, but I got the concept from other commentators. But we'll be making frequent reference to that. All right, so lesson 1, let's dig into that and start by talking about what the word what the word Ecclesiastes means, and you see the similarity to the Greek word ecclesia. So this term Ecclesiastes comes from the Septuagint version of the Old Testament. The Septuagint version is where they took the Hebrew Old Testament and they translated it into Greek. And so in the Greek Old Testament, translated from the Hebrew into Greek, the word here, Ecclesiastes, you can see in it the word ecclesia, can't you? And we know ecclesia. We don't know a lot of Greek, but we know the word ecclesia. Ecclesia is the word that's translated in our New Testaments as church or assembly. It literally means an assembly. So in Greek, ecclesia means an assembly. And you can see ecclesia in Ecclesiastes. And that's not a mistake. The name given to the book literally then means one who speaks to an assembly, all right? Ecclesia, one who speaks to an assembly. And so you get the idea, even from the name of the book, that the intention is of someone who wants to address an audience. He wants to give a message to a crowd of people or an assembly, and that's what it is. It is the words of the preacher. Sometimes you see that. Maybe your printing of the Bible shows as a subtitle to Ecclesiastes, the preacher, or words of the preacher. All right, who is the preacher then? Who is this one who wants to address the assembly? Because that's sort of the literal meaning of Ecclesiastes. Well, we believe clearly it's Solomon. Chapter 1, verse 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Well, what son of David was king in Jerusalem? Well, he had other descendants, but his immediate son, who was king in Jerusalem, was Solomon, right? No doubt about that. Skip over to verse 12, chapter 1, verse 12. I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. King over Israel in Jerusalem. How many kings were there over Israel in Jerusalem? Saul, David, Solomon, right? Because after that, maybe very briefly Rehoboam, but it would have to be one of those four, because other than basically Saul, David, Solomon, there weren't any kings over Israel in Jerusalem. After Rehoboam, then the kings over Israel were in Samaria, right? Because that was the name given to the northern kingdom. So it's got to be Saul, David, Solomon. We think it's Solomon. It couldn't be Saul, because Saul wasn't a son of David. It couldn't be David, because David wasn't his own son. So it's got to be Solomon, right? It's got to be Solomon. Now, we should know that there are some who question that conclusion. I don't know how much voice we should give to skeptics and doubters, but there are some who say that the book of Solomon was written by an impersonator. He impersonated Solomon, but he wasn't really Solomon. I don't know why that helps anybody. Their argument is that maybe there's not as direct a correlation between the things we'll read and study in the book and the actual life of Solomon that we talked about in our lesson last Sunday morning. I don't know. Style and presentation. Some of them say that the style of this book is not so much Hebrew, maybe more Persian in influence. I don't give much credence to that. It seems clearly and is generally, widely accepted to be the work of King Solomon. Tom, do you have the...
Well, you follow that concept, then do you really have an inspired writer presenting it? Can you put any credence in it?
Well, the people who doubt that probably would say, no, it's not inspired. It's just a human production. We don't think so. All right. So the theme of the book is this contrast between, question 4, what's the theme of the book? It's the contrast of viewing life without God, complete vanity. We'll frequently read the expression vexation of spirit. There's nothing worth doing if there is no God. And sort of the fruitlessness of material pursuits, of all activity on earth. I'm going to die and be forgotten, and it's all going to be left behind. And what's the purpose? What's the value of it? The valuelessness, the fruitlessness of earthly pursuits and material things without God. Again, keys to that, when he's thinking that way, when he's writing that way, keys to that are going to be the words vanity, vexation of spirit. There's also a similar terminology that we'll read here just in a minute. Under the sun, things done under the sun. Well, where are the things under the sun? Well, that's right here, right? That's right here on physical earth. And so when he says things under the sun, he's talking about just our earthly existence, all viewed from a physical perspective without any spiritual notion to it. So those are trigger phrases that we'll be looking for as we go through Ecclesiastes. All right, question 5. Verse 2. So, verse 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. All right. So, we're going to transition. I marked that the first sermon really begins at verse 12, but we're sort of transitioning into that first sermon. And he's going to start out from this vanity perspective. Vanity, a very easy definition of vanity is worthlessness. I think the New International Version even there says meaninglessness. All is vanity. All is meaningless, Solomon says. Well, do you really believe that? Do you believe that the rest of the Bible teaches that everything is meaningless? No, we don't believe that, do we? And the Bible doesn't teach that. The Bible teaches that there is meaning and purpose to life. And so you got to realize then, when you read that expression, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, or all is meaningless, that's Solomon talking about there's no God if there's no God in the picture. And we just lay this down as we're introducing the book. Wouldn't you agree that's true? That's a true analysis? If there is no God, then there's no meaning to anything that we're doing here. Because as we'll read, and he'll say later on, I work and I labor and I try to get money and things that money can buy, with the reality being, I'm only here for just a little while, and I'm going to die, and that will all be left behind. I personally will be forgotten. Anything that I've accumulated will be left to heirs who may not have the good sense to even value what I've left behind to them. It's meaningless. It's just worthless. There's no value. I think that that's a true analysis. And I wonder, don't you, how do people of the world and we live in a society that's becoming increasingly secular. And when we hear that terminology secular, it means we're living in a society that is increasingly godless. They don't think about God. God's not in their view. How do they keep going? Why would you keep going? What would be the purpose to keep going if there is no God? And that's what Solomon's dealing with primarily here in the book. It's just a worthless struggle if there is no God. Anybody have a thought on that, Monty?
I think we can see a lot of that in our society now with all the riots and stuff that's gone on this past summer, and all the lawlessness. I mean, if you don't have to answer to God and evolution was true, then we're each as authoritative as another, so why should we follow him? We'll just do what we want to, and it's okay.
Yeah.
And that's the concept and the product of what comes when you have a no God involved attitude.
Yeah, I think you're right. Verse 3, what profit hath a man of all his labors which he taketh under the sun? Profitability, this idea of profit, no profit, things of profit, that's going to be a recurring theme in the book. I counted at least 7 times where the idea of profit or profitability is mentioned in this 12-chapter book. So he comes back to the idea of what's the profit, what's the value, what's the good of it throughout the book. And he first uses there in verse 3, what profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? Under the sun, that's the trigger phrase. We're going to see it over and over again. That's the trigger phrase, here and now. Physical life, physical existence. And that's the question. What profit is there of all the things that you do, all the labor that you do, if it's just here and now? You know, I've used this illustration before, and I think it's a great challenge to us. We'll be talking about this continually throughout Ecclesiastes, but you know, the fact of the matter is that all of us in this room, in relatively short time, are going to die. And pretty quickly after that, we're going to be forgotten. And as an exercise in the reality of that, think back. What were your parents' names? Well, you can name your parents, right? What were your grandparents? What were their names? Now, you obviously got 2 parents, you got 4 grandparents. Can you name all of your grandparents? Can you name your grandmother's maiden names? Okay, so you got 4 grandparents. Well, what about your great-grandparents? You got 8 great-grandparents. Can you name all of your great-grandparents? There are very few people who can do. I can't do that. There are very few people who can name all of their great-grandparents. Now, maybe if you're one of those people who've gotten into, using the internet to investigate your ancestry, that's a big deal on the internet, I understand. But if you've done that, maybe every once in a while somebody will say, I can do it. Very few people can do that. The vast majority of us cannot do that. Now, all right, so now move it forward. So Joel knows me. Joel's children, my grandchildren, know me. But there's a high probability that Joel's children's children, my grandchildren, Cole, Caleb, Chloe, Cohen, there's a high probability that when I'm dead and gone, Joel's children's children won't even know my name. My name, let alone anything else about me. They won't even know my name. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity, Solomon says. And he's right. He's absolutely right about that if there's no God in the picture. If this is all there is, it's not much. And so we can really, I think, hone in on what he's saying here. Yeah.
It's like the things that we work for all our life to have and it's nothing wrong with, having things, but these things that we have, we hold dear, after we're gone, our children probably don't want a part of it. They might take one or two items and that'll be it.
Yeah, exactly right. The things that we think are precious and valuable, they're really not to anybody else. The things we store up, the things we have. Cindy and I had kind of an interesting experience a couple of years ago with the lady she was helping to take care of, Gigi's good friend that Cindy was helping take care of. She lived in an apartment right there near our house. And when she passed, it became Cindy's burden to dispose of the stuff that she had in her apartment. We didn't know what to do with it. And so there's this realtor auctioneer here in Columbia, Freddie Morton. I don't know if you ever see his truck around town. He's got his truck wrapped, and he's an auctioneer and he's a real estate agent. But he buys estates. And so we called him and he said, yeah, he'd come look. And before he came to look, Cindy said, what do you think he'll give us for this stuff? You think it's worth $10,000? I said, $10,000? I said, I'd be amazed if he offered $1,000. Well, he came and he looked it all over. And he said, I'm going to take all this stuff. He said, I'll take everything. I'll clean the place out. But I want you to know that I'm going to be taking a lot of stuff right straight to the dump. He said, I'll give you $700. Well, I mean, so here this lady, and she was a very secularly minded woman. She was not religiously minded. But all of this stuff that she accumulated that she assumed was valuable, it wasn't valuable to anybody. Now, the application of that, the same thing is true of us. The things that we think that we have that are of value, they're not valuable to anybody else. It's all vanity under the sun, right? Boy, I'm telling you, that really hit home to me when we saw that everything that this woman had accumulated was effectively worthless. Made you think about your own accumulation of stuff. All right, verse 4. I asked you a question about verse 4. The earth abideth forever. Verse 4, one generation passeth away and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. Now, if you ever have a sit-down study with Jehovah's Witnesses, they love to use that verse in particular to support their view. You know what the Jehovah's Witnesses teach about the earth? They claim that this physical universe will not be destroyed. That the Lord is going to, when He returns, He's going to take the 144,000 to heaven. That's the literal, exact. 144,000 people will go to heaven. The rest of the righteous are going to live here on the earth, And the Lord's going to put it back into the condition that it was in when Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden. He's going to make it, put it back perfect and pristine, but the earth will continue. He says the physical universe will not be destroyed. Now we believe that verses like 2 Peter 3 verse 10 definitely says the earth and all of the universe will be destroyed, the physical universe. So how do we explain this? We've got to be ready to explain this to the Jehovah's Witnesses, or else we've got a contradiction. By the way, some of our own brethren are starting to take that view. I think we may deal with that on the virtual Bible study this coming Thursday night. I've come across some evidence that some of our own brethren are beginning to take the view that the earth is not going to be destroyed. You've got to explain verse 4 in the context of what Solomon is saying, right? Solomon is saying, one generation passes, another takes its place, it dies, another generation takes its place. But the earth just keeps on spinning. It's that view that he has, right? It's in the context of the view. And really, relative to my life or yours or our generation, the earth just keeps on spinning. Our time here is just a blink of an eye. The earth just keeps on spinning. But it's not to be taken literally to mean forever without end. Eric, did you have a thought? Tom?
Well, if you take that concept, then you have to take the concept that these generations are just physical people. They don't have souls. That they come, they go, they're gone.
Yeah.
So the principle would be, if the earth remains forever, there's no really soul, so what purpose does the earth really have? So, if it stayed and kept on spinning, it's not a habitation for the quote righteous, because Solomon basically saying that doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's right. There's other places in the Old Testament. This might be worth noting in your margin so that you have a quick reference to answer the Jehovah's Witness. There's other places in the Old Testament where the word forever does not mean, when I say forever, I mean without end, ever, never. It's going to go on infinitely. When I say forever, I mean infinitely without any prospect of change. But the word forever here in the scripture does not always mean that. For instance, look at Exodus 27. And there's a lot of examples like this, but Exodus 27 verse 20. Thou shalt command the children of Israel that they bring the pure olive oil beaten for the light to cause the lamp to burn always in the tabernacle of the congregation without the veil, which is before the testimony. Aaron and his sons shall order it from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a statute forever unto their generations on the behalf of the children of Israel. So the lampstand in the tabernacle was to burn forever. Is it? It's not, right? We don't even know where that lampstand is, or if it. There's always those who search for the lost ark of the covenant and the fixtures that were in the tabernacle and temple. They're gone. The lamp surely is not burning, but this uses the word forever. Then look, just one more example. Look in the next chapter, chapter 28, verse 43. The previous verses talk about describing the apparel of the priests and the high priest. And chapter 28, verse 43, they shall be upon Aaron and upon his sons when they come into the tabernacle of the congregation, or when they come near unto the altar to minister in the holy place, that they bear not iniquity or die, and it shall be a statute forever unto him and his seed after him. Well, there forever obviously doesn't mean forever, right? There are no priests serving in the tabernacle or temple. We couldn't prove who Aaron's seed is today if our life depended upon it. Forever there definitely doesn't mean forever. It means, and some commentators will express this, that the word forever often means age lasting, throughout the age. And so that's not what we mean when we use the word forever, but that's what it means in the text. Be ready to explain that. So the explanation of verse 4 is twofold. One is forever is used here doesn't mean forever. But secondly, understand the perspective of Solomon when he said that was this life without God, this vanity and vexation of an existence here on physical earth, and this is all there is. Tom, do you have a thought?
Just thinking back to the lampstand. We can go back historically and show that that lampstand didn't burn for certain periods of time. You could actually go into here some of Solomon's sons, prior to the carrying away of Babylon. The temple became disarrayed and wasn't being worshipped under various kings, and they were repairing it. They found the law, and they had to go back to it. So
and they didn't even know what the law said.
The law saw, so they couldn't have known what that was. When they were carried away into Babylon, there was 70 plus years that it didn't light.
Exactly.
And then when Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD,
it went out forever.
It hasn't been lit since.
Forever.
So, I mean, if you just took that little concept, we could show that it didn't apply and it wasn't a solid statement that you could put any faith in.
Exactly right. So this very early, we're just 4 verses into the book, but do you see the importance of being able to discern Solomon's perspective in the various statements that he made? Now, some of the statements that he's going to make as the book goes on will refer to God and thinking about God. So you got to know this flip-flopping mindset of Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes. I think that's the thing that makes Ecclesiastes a challenging book to understand and lends it to being misused like the Jehovah's Witnesses do about chapter 1, verse 4. If people are not careful, they'll mess it up for sure. All right. Question 9. From verses 5 through 7, verses 5 through 7 suggest 3 observations about continuing natural processes. Okay, so he said, the earth abides forever at the end of verse 4. And then he goes on, sort of expounding on that. The sun also riseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to the place where he arose. The wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again. Now all of that was sort of expanding upon the idea the earth abides forever. But he says the sun keeps coming up, the sun keeps going down. The wind keeps whirling around, it just does so continually. So he's just using those expressions to illustrate the natural process. You're going to die. You're going to live for just a few years and then you're going to die. But the earth is just going to keep doing its thing. The natural processes are going to continue. So all he's doing there is sort of expanding upon that notion. There's an interesting statement in verse 7, and I ask you about this. Is there a special significance to these statements about the physical processes? Verse 7, all the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again. I didn't take time to look it up, but I have in the past. Have you ever heard a number placed on the volume of water that the Mississippi River discharges into the Gulf of Mexico? I mean, and they know, they measured it. They can tell you very clearly. It's incredible. The volume of water passing New Orleans as it goes into the Gulf of Mexico is absolutely incredible. How come the Gulf of Mexico doesn't overflow? I mean, how come it just doesn't swamp everything? All that water going into it. Well, we know. We call it the water cycle. What happens is the water over the oceans evaporates and it comes back. How did he say it there? From unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again. So the oceans evaporate, clouds come over the dry land, dump rain, it runs back to the sea. It evaporates, it comes and rains, and it runs back to the sea. It's called the water cycle. We understand it very well. But they didn't understand that in Solomon's day. They didn't have that understanding. And so some people would use this as one of those sort of subtle examples of an inspired statement that the author would not have had the ability to know on his own. This is what we would call scientific foreknowledge. That the Bible expresses some scientific notions that we have come along to discover later that were not known in the day that the Bible was written. You know, it's a little bit hard for us. I mean, that seems so easy to comprehend for us, but by all indication, they did not know about the water cycle in the days of Solomon. Thoughts or comments here? Anybody? Dale?
Very like you talk about the Mississippi River. Nobody can really comprehend what goes through the Tennessee River.
Oh, yeah.
Through one of them dams, you'd be amazed if you knew how many.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. And I know you've been out there on the river as we have. And if you're just fishing away and not paying attention, you look up and you can't believe how far you've drifted, because the water doesn't like it. The water just doesn't look like it's doing anything, but it's moving on.
They can turn one generator on down there, and if you blow it down, that water will rise like 2 foot. I mean, just
Yeah, danger can be dangerous. Exactly right. Tom?
A lot of people don't even comprehend that the Mississippi River is fed by numerous tributaries.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them are, one of them is basically bigger than the Mississippi itself. Like the Missouri, used to be, when I was in school, it was the longest river in the United States. But they changed, because everybody got it wrong, they changed it to from where its fork started. But you got the Missouri, the Ohio, the Illinois, the Tennessee, the Arkansas. You could just go through and name it. And these aren't little
It's basically the watershed of the eastern half of our continent.
If you take the continental divide, almost all the water from the western states flows towards Mississippi. And all the water from the west side of the Appalachian flow to Mississippi.
Yeah.
So there's, a lot of water that goes down.
Exactly right. And again, how come it doesn't flood the Gulf and it's all over? Well, because of this water cycle. But again, Solomon wrote about it. I don't know that he understood it, but by inspiration he penned it. Let's see. Question 10. In what sense is there no new thing under the sun? Look at verse 8. Let's read 8 through 10. All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be. That which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. There's that expression. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before us. All right. So in what sense would you say there's no new thing under the sun? I've got a phone in my pocket that's a relatively new invention. Solomon sure didn't know about a smartphone. Solomon didn't know about a personal computer. Solomon didn't know about my car in the parking lot. In what sense is there no new thing under the sun, Monty?
If we think about it, the technologies that we have finally discovered here in the 20th and 21st century to be able to do these things you're just talking about already existed. The principles that God established through physics and whatnot already existed. We may not have discovered it yet, but the capability of it was already there. So there's nothing, we're not going to come up with something new, because whatever we would use to develop what we would call new, God created about 6,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So there hasn't been no creation since the sixth day. God rested on the seventh, no new creation since then. So everything that we have is a result of that event that took place then. So we're not making anything new. We may be figuring out a new application for what we've already got, or something new and neat to do with what we've already got, but it's not really new.
Okay, I think that's right. I think that explanation is helpful. But I think I would fall back more. Eric, what were you going to say?
What he said application-wise, there may be new applications, but the basics of what you're talking about is communication. There's no new challenge. There's nothing new with challenges of communication.
Yeah.
The difficulties that go along with that, and the benefits of doing that.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the phone, communication, that's always been there.
right? I think that is all true. And I would go further to say, in the context of Solomon's vexed presentation, he's saying, I was young, I enjoyed the things of my youth, I got married, I had children, we had family affairs going on with our kids, and then I got old and I died. There's no new thing under the sun. That's always been the case, right? You know, we don't know a whole lot. We think we're so far advanced over our ancestors, but their lives could basically boil down to the same thing that our lives are boiled down to, right? I was young and I enjoyed the time of my youth. I got married. I had children. We enjoyed our family. I got old. I died. There's no new thing under the sun. He's talking about the life cycle here. He's just talking about how life progresses. It's not different. It's not different now than it's ever been. It just keeps on going. The same thing happening over and over. So I do think in the literal sense, in reality, there's no new thing under the sun. There are some new inventions, we understand that. But those, as Monty and Eric were pointing out, that's just really an application of what was already here. But I really think the bottom line is, in regards to life and how life progresses, nothing changes, nothing different. It's pretty amazing when we read things in the Bible, and here we are 2,000, 3,000 years later, and some of the things that the Bible says sound like they could be written today. There's no new thing under the sun. Dale?
Greg, God invented life, so everything that man invents today, really he did it with God's help. So, you know, there was some extreme things were invented way back when we don't even remember. They were just, devastating back then. But,
Yeah.
you know, even today we still use some of those same things. So,
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
not nothing really new that a man's mind can do something.
Yeah.
He does it because of God.
Exactly right. All right. We're in Ecclesiastes 1. Ecclesiastes 1. Verse 11. Ecclesiastes 1, verse 11. There's no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of the things that are to come with those that shall come after. And that goes to the point I was making earlier. You know, we're going to die and be forgotten. So we don't really remember too much. As I was saying, we can't even name our ancestors more than 3 or 4 generations back. And 3 or 4 generations in the future will not be able to remember us. That's just this futility that's just tearing him up. And it would be a very frustrating thing to contemplate if there's no God. You know, you've seen that statement. How does it go? If there is no God, nothing matters. If there is a God, nothing else matters. Right? That's pretty good conclusion, pretty good summary statement, right? Thoughts, Tom?
We are a type of people that always try to sort of make our mark in history. I mean, if you look at our, U.S. history, we put up memorials to great men to remember them. We put their sayings in books. Sometimes we have a hard time comprehending, why does every president need a library? I mean, how many presidential libraries have you gone to read what they wrote?
I've never been to one.
And we've got basically a president's home right down the street. How many here have been to that?
I have been to that, but
I didn't buy it. But men do a lot of those things. Now, God gave instructions to the Israelites to remember certain things. One of the things that he did and put in place was these genealogies, and Solomon was very aware of that. He could go back and trace who his father was, who his grandfather was, who his great-grandfather was, who his great-great-grandfather was, all the way back to Adam, basically, because God preserved that, and he preserved it all
necessary
the way up
for
through
the
the
promise,
Babylonians
yeah.
until the Romans destroyed it.
It was necessary. God preserved it. I don't think it would have been otherwise, but God preserved it because it was necessary to prove the identity of Jesus. Exactly. But you know that. But your point about remembrances and how easy we forget things, we could apply that to the Lord's Supper that we'll observe here in just a little bit. The Lord understood our propensity for forgetting and our need for reminding, and so this is a valuable thing because we need to remember what Jesus did. And the likelihood is that would fade from memory pretty quick if we weren't being constantly reminded of it. And that's what the Lord's Supper is about, is reminding us of Jesus' death. All right, let's read to the end of the chapter. We may not have time to conclude our discussion of it, but beginning at verse 12, Ecclesiastes 1, verse 12. I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I gave my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under the sun. This sore travail hath God given to the sons of man to be exercised therewith. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. That which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. I communed with mine own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estate, and have gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is vexation of spirit. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increases sorrow. Look at our chart. So this definitely then, I really think that a good starting place for our consideration here is verse 12. This would be in that first sermon, and he tells us that it's a sore, what he's talking about is sore travail, verse 13. Verse 14, vanity, vexation of spirit. So that's his perspective here. Understand that it's so, or else you've got a problem. The problem is going to be, verse 18, in much wisdom is much grief. He that increases knowledge increases sorrow. Well, that doesn't seem to line up with other things I read in the Bible. In other places of the Bible, it urges me to acquire wisdom. I'm commanded to acquire knowledge. And Solomon is saying, well, that's just going to bring grief and sorrow on you. If you seek wisdom and knowledge, you're just going to increase grief and sorrow in your life. How so? Again, that's true if there's no God. And so you got to keep in mind that in this section, Solomon is writing from that viewpoint. And it is true. And so he's going to talk about his own experience there. He says, I gave my heart to seek and search out wisdom concerning all the things that are done under the sun here on earth. But that was a sore travail. That was a sorry work. I've seen the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity, vexation. It just doesn't do any good. There's no value to it. You can't straighten out the things that are crooked. You can't fill the things that are wanting. You can work as hard as you want, and crooked things will stay crooked, and wanting things will stay wanting. You can't satisfy that. He said, I got more wisdom. I acquired more wisdom than any that had been in Jerusalem before me. I had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. Well, that certainly lines up with what we know about Solomon, about his life. I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. The word madness there is self-boasting, to make a show, to rave. So he said, I made a big show. I did things that I could boast about and rave about. But he said that was vexation of spirit. So in this section, and the better known part of this section will be when we start into chapter 2 next week, Lord willing. He's going to talk about everything he did, everything he applied himself to know and do. And he was completely frustrated from that endeavor. And so again, we'll see that more next week. Any final thoughts? We're just out of time. All right, thanks everybody. We'll be ready to tackle into chapter 2 next week, Lord willing.